This is the Prairie Weekly. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us today. The guest on the program today is Kevin Cramer, who is running for the U.S. House as a Republican. Kevin, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Dave. Always a pleasure.
Well, just wanted to ask, why do you want to seek the congressional seat now?
Well, I guess just a mounting level of frustration as a taxpayer, as a parent, as a husband, as a citizen. When I watch what seems to be going on in Congress and see the federal budget going further and further, spinning out of control. When I look at my paycheck every month and see that more and more of it's going to fund programs that I don't agree with, that I don't think most Americans agree with. I see the federal government taking a bigger chunk of what I earn, what other families earn in North Dakota and America, taking more of what farmers earn, more of what businesses earn. And I just, that level of frustration has gotten to the point where the circumstances are such in my life that I've been given the opportunity to actually do something about it. And I guess I was raised to believe that when you have an opportunity to change things and do something for the better, you need to take advantage of those opportunities because it's a responsibility.
Yet you're 35 years old. You're very young.
Right.
And I can say that because I'm older than you. But you're 35 and you're state tourism director, which is a pretty decent job.
It's a nice job. I enjoy it very, very much. I'm very, honored and have been that Governor Schaefer has shown the kind of confidence in me that he has by giving me this very important responsibility to head up the tourism department for North Dakota. And tourism is the third leading industry in our state. It's a fast-growing industry, and it's a very important position, and I don't take it lightly. So, yes, it's a good job. It's an enjoyable job, and I do it with a great deal of enthusiasm.
So, again, why give that up to go for something that might be a little dicey?
Well, because, again, just getting back to public service is, to me, and political service is a very high calling that few people are given the skills and the opportunities to be able to enter into the political arena. It's important. It's important to my children and their future. It's important to their friends, and it's important to their entire generation. And so, although yes, I have a fairly comfortable lifestyle right now, in that I get to go home and see my children on a regular basis. I get to see my wife a lot. I have a wonderful job that I enjoy a great deal, but there is now an opportunity for me to enter an arena where I can do even more in trying to make my children's future better. So, yeah, there are sacrifices, but at the same time, there are rich rewards in political service.
Now, that as we tape this, we don't have the Republican convention finished yet,
right.
But so far nobody else has come up and said, I'm going to run for Congress as well.
Right.
So we assume now you're going to be running against Earl Pomeroy, who is a two-term Democrat.
Right, and I assume the same thing. To my knowledge, nobody is looking at entering into the race on the Republican side other than me.
We'll get into that in a little bit, but I'd like to ask you if there are some core beliefs that you are running on, what would they be?
Well, I've been using the familiar now phrase of faith, freedom, and family for obvious reasons. First of all, it is what I stand for in general and fundamentally, but it also is a nice alliteration, so it works very well in the speech. But it has to do really with who do you have faith in? Do you have faith in the federal government, in bureaucracy? Do you believe that the solutions to our problems lie in more government, in federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. or Denver someplace? Or does your faith lie with yourself, with your work ethic, with people, with your faith in God and in community? Well, I happen to have more faith in God and people than I happen to have in the federal government. Another core belief is, and I think it's related, is freedom. I personally put freedom ahead of security, and I think that this nation was founded on freedom, and that government is becoming more and more intrusive, far too intrusive, and I just believe that we need to get back to more fundamental freedoms, and we need to become a more family-friendly society, as we see families breaking up and divorce rates, and we see a tax code that punishes people for being married and for having families, that we need to get back to our roots a little bit. So those are my fundamental core beliefs. It has to do with who spends your money. Does the government spend your money, or does the family or the wage earner get to spend their own money? The business leader, the businessman, the businesswoman, the farmer, the family. And so it's just a matter of who do you put your faith in, the government or people.
Sounds a little bit like Phil Graham's campaign when he was talking about, he kept saying it's, who do you want to spend your money? Should it be the government or should it be you?
Right. Well, that's right. It's fundamental to our party, in all honesty, whether it's Phil Graham or Bob Dole. It's fundamental to our party. It's the fundamental difference between Republicans and Democrats. It's why Republicans support freedom to farm. It's why North Dakota farmers overwhelmingly support freedom to farm, and why Democrats don't. They like control in Washington, D.C. We like control in North Dakota. It's why Earl Pomeroy supports or doesn't support welfare reform, and why I do, and why the Republicans in Congress support welfare reform, because Republicans know that Ed Schaefer, working with county and local officials in North Dakota, can better determine what kind of programs are good for their constituents than a bureaucrat can in Washington, D.C. It's fundamental to all kinds of policies. I mean, it's Medicaid, it's, like I said, welfare reform, it's agriculture, it's business, it's regulatory relief. You're getting back to farming again. Of course, it has to do with who do you think can make the best decisions on what you grow on your fields when. Does the farmer have the knowledge and the capabilities to make those decisions, or does the federal government? Well, Earl Pomeroy clearly thinks that the federal government does. I believe that farmers can make those decisions. I think they're perfectly capable and bright people that can make those decisions better than the government.
Let's talk a little bit about freedom to farm, because the overwhelming feeling of our congressional delegation is that freedom to farm is a bad deal for North Dakota. Yet you believe that a majority of North Dakota farmers will do okay under freedom to farm, or actually support the entire concept.
Well, I think that's fairly clear when you look at who's supporting freedom to farm in North Dakota. There's one group in North Dakota, one organization that does not support freedom to farm, and that is the North Dakota Farmers Union. And now letters to the editor have been popping up from members of Farmers Union saying, hey, that hierarchy doesn't represent us. Freedom to farm would put $600,000 directly into the pockets of farmers in North Dakota in the next 2 years. It more importantly gives the farmers the freedom to grow what they want, where they want to do it. It gives them the flexibility. It shows confidence in them as farmers, as business people. And so it's lost on me how our congressional delegation, Earl Pomeroy specifically, can go and vote against something that the grain growers support, the wheat growers support, the corn growers support, the sugar growers support, that the North Dakota Farm Bureau supports. How he can go and vote against it. And what's even worse is that he has twice now introduced an amendment that would take half of the money that would go to North Dakota farmers and give it to the Secretary of Agriculture to use in a slush fund. He calls it Rural Development Fund. And all I can say is, where has Earl Pomeroy been when in the last several years there have been many rural development projects started, not by the Secretary of Agriculture or any other federal program, but rather by North Dakota farmers. They started Dakota Growers Pasta Plant in Carrington. Now they're working on another pasta plant at Leeds. They started Pro Gold near Wahpeton. They started the sugar co-ops years ago, and the processing plants in Crystal Sugar and Mindak and Bison co-ops and processing, and now they're working on beef processing. So all of those projects were done by North Dakota farmers with their own investments. And if we can provide some regulatory relief to them, help them make more money, not take half their money and give it to a Washington bureaucrat, I have a lot more faith. Again, it comes back to who do you have faith in, Washington or North Dakotans?
You're talking about regulatory relief, and one of the arguments that's put forth by the people from the North Dakota Grain Growers Association is that maybe eventually then you can start looking at backing off on Swamp Buster, backing off on Sod Buster, backing off on some of these regulations, and letting farmers be more stewards of the land, so to speak.
Exactly, and they've proven to be very good stewards of the land. I don't know very many people who have taken better care of our natural resource, our land, even wildlife, than farmers, especially our farmers. I have just gained so much respect in this current position of tourism director as we deal on a regular basis with natural resources issues. I've gained so much respect for the farmers who are good stewards of the land. And it's who do you have faith in? I was very disappointed earlier this week to read a story in the paper where some of the North Dakota commodity groups, I think John Cook with the grain growers was leading this delegation to go to Washington to try and convince our congressional delegation to support the Market Transition Act. And I thought, it is a sad day when North Dakotans have to go to Washington to convince our delegation, who is supposed to represent us. We don't represent them, they represent us. But they have to go tell Earl Pomeroy and try to convince Earl Pomeroy to vote the right way for North Dakota on an issue. And, to me, Earl Pomeroy should be calling back to North Dakota and saying, hey, what do y'all feel about this freedom to farm thing? Should I support it? As opposed to having to send North Dakotans there to convince him to support it.
You also mentioned block grants, not specifically, but
Right.
you did talk about welfare reform, which also leads into the discussion about block grants.
Right. Yes,
let me frame this question as a devil's advocate, because there are some Democrats who are saying, if we have block grants, is there any guarantee that the states are going to do the right thing? They bring out the argument that they're worried that the states are going to take the money and throw it someplace else and say we're not going to spend the money the way we should be spending the money. What's your theory about that?
Well, it's very fundamental. Again, it gets back to who do you have faith in? Who do you trust? I trust Ed Schaefer. I trust the North Dakota legislature. I trust county commissioners, county workers, community advocates a lot more than I trust Washington bureaucrats. And it's not even just a matter of trust, but who do you have faith in? Because even a well-meaning Washington bureaucrat who wants to do the right thing doesn't know the situation in Grafton, North Dakota, for example, not nearly as well as we do. So by block granting it, not only do you put the money where it can be used most efficiently, because I believe compassion comes from communities. So you get it to the community, they'll spend it appropriately. I just have that faith. But secondly, it'll also be more efficiently spent, because the federal government has proven time and time again it cannot spend money efficiently. And so by doing the block grant program, you not only get the service where it should be, but you do it for less money, saving taxpayers.
Should there be any kind of strings attached to a block grant, or would you prefer, if this were a perfect world, just basically saying, okay, here's a block grant, states, it's yours?
Well, clearly there probably has to be some parameters, some general parameters, but the ultimate judge are the voters. And so the closer you get that money to the communities, the closer the accountability is to the people spending it. It's very, very easy for somebody who lives in Washington, D.C., or Maryland or Virginia to do the wrong thing with your money. But it's very much more difficult for the governor or your local legislator to do the wrong thing with your money. And so accountability is always greater closer to home than it is, across the Potomac River.
Talk about the issue of your money. That goes into the next subject, the balanced budget.
Yes.
First off, you support a balanced budget amendment?
I support a balanced budget amendment. I support a balanced budget. It's sad that we have to have an amendment to get a balanced budget. We don't have quite enough people right now to get either one. It doesn't appear, because we have the wrong person in the White House. But I would support a balanced budget amendment. I do not buy into the fact that it's not good for North Dakotans, because I believe a balanced budget is good for everybody. And this is why. It's very simple. It gets back again to whose money are you spending. And this is the people's money.
I think we've got a campaign theme here.
You've got it. You've got it. A balanced budget does a number of things. The biggest thing it does is it lowers interest rates. Balancing the budget would lower home mortgage rates 2.7%. That means on an average $100,000 home mortgage for 30 years, a family would save about $2,200 a year. That's $2,200 per year that can go into the family's pocket to be spent on a vacation, education, whatever the family wants to spend it on. It's their money. An average $11,000 college loan would save the family $2,000 a year. An average $15,000 car would be $900 less if we balance the federal budget. Now, that's pretty darn important. Now, that brings us back to farmers. farmers are borrowers. That's how they do their business. Well, when we can lower the interest rates, think of what we can do to helping farmers be more profitable. And that's, if there's one thing I hear from farmers more often than anything, it's that we want to be able to be more profitable. Lowering interest rates would do that. In fact, over the course of 7 years, farmers would save $15 billion if we would balance the federal budget. Now, the interesting thing is that people have been talking about balancing the budget for years. In fact, my entire political life, there have been people that went to Congress saying, I promise I'll do it or I won't run again. The problem is, it wasn't until we got a majority in the last year that people actually did it. And Republicans have actually passed balanced budgets. Unfortunately, the president has vetoed them, and we don't have quite enough votes to override the veto. And no North Dakotan yet has voted for a balanced budget. And I would be happy to be the first one.
You've been watching, though, what's been going on, the idea of these continuing resolutions, a couple of government shutdowns.
Right.
There seems to be some polling, and I'll say this because every time I come on the microphone I say this, ask not on whom the poll polls, they poll on me. But there seems to be a polling that says the Republicans are getting a black eye out of it, or at least sharing some of the blame for it. What's your take on what's been happening there? Do the Republicans have a black eye, and do they deserve one?
Well, I first of all, I think that everybody deserves a black eye if they don't get the budget balanced. They're there, they should be balancing the budget. And that means everybody in Congress, that means the President of the United States, that means the senators, and they are not doing their job if they don't balance this budget. I don't care who they are or what party they belong to. I will say this, that the Republican public relations machine has not done as effective a job as the White House public relations machine. I mean, Bill Clinton has shut the government down twice, and the people think the Republican Congress has shut the government down twice. Bill Clinton had balanced budgets on his desk. All he had to do was sign them. And this is the guy who promised he'd do it. In fact, if we were to keep track of his promises in 2 years, we'd have a balanced budget. We wouldn't be signing one. We'd literally have a budget balance in 2 years based on Bill Clinton's promises. Not only that, but we'd have middle income tax cut instead of the largest tax increase in the history of the world.
So is that something that the Republicans have to do, is get their message out, crank up that PR machine, if that's the way the game is played right now?
From a practical political standpoint, what I think Republicans need, Dave, is I think they need a campaign real badly. And so I'm glad I get to be back here talking about this, because there needs to be more people. There need to be more Republican Party activists, more Republican candidates talking about these issues, talking about why, what a balanced budget does for a typical family, what middle-income tax relief does for North Dakota, what freedom to farm does for North Dakota's farmers, and why all this is important. Because quite frankly, they've not done what they need to do. I don't think, and I don't blame just the leadership of the Congress or the Republican Party for that. I think it's very difficult to get things through the national media machine, but it's not so difficult when you get into a campaign and you get to bring those issues closer to people.
Speaking of campaign, it's always hard to go against an incumbent, and the conventional wisdom is that Earl Pomeroy is a popular incumbent.
Right.
What do you have to do at this point to unseat him?
Well, I think we have to do a number of things. I think, for the most part, what we have to do is take our message to as many people as often as we can. I welcome the opportunity anytime, as often as we can do it, to get Earl Pomeroy and I together to talk about these issues in a civilized debate. I'm not afraid of that. I suspect he's not either. I think we ought to get together and do that. I think we ought to talk about vision. I think we ought to talk about the future of our children and what's the best route to take. There's an awful lot of negativism that comes out of Washington right now. And there's a lot of this, I'm fighting for this, I'm fighting for that, and they're wringing their hands and saying, oh, if we only, if they all see it my way, and I'm trying so hard. And the problem is that those are tactics based on people's, on demise. They're based on people's fears. You always hear this stuff about how Medicare, the Republican plan is going to throw people out in the street, and Medicaid is going to leave handicapped children out in the street, and the Republican plan, and I don't want to sit and talk about negative things. I want to sit and talk about the hopes and dreams of people, because I believe this state was founded by people who had great vision and great hopes and great dreams, and they were positive people that overcame huge obstacles to settle here, And we ought to have that can-do spirit again, instead of this hand-wringing mediocrity, woe is me, we're doing our best, but, we're all we can do is fight. And I'd rather not fight. I'd rather go bring people along.
You said a can-do spirit. Are you from Can-Do?
Well, actually, funny you should ask that question. I'm not from Can-Do, although my father's from Can-Do. My grandmother is buried in Can-Do. A lot of my family's up there. My wife, Chris, is from Can-Do, and her family still lives up there. So we're pretty fond of the can-do spirit.
A lot of people say it's better than a Cavalier spirit. Anyway, I'll get off that.
I'm sure there are Prairie Public listeners in Cavalier.
Absolutely, we think so. Anyway, let me just go on to something a little different, because you were, when you were chairman of the North Dakota Republican Party, you talked about the party, the Big Tent,
right?
Which was the thing that Haley Barbour even talks about.
Oh,
that.
Yes.
But have you been watching? And I'm sure you've been watching what's been happening in the national media. There's a lot of speculation that Pat Buchanan may, if he's not allowed to speak at the Republican convention, take his people and say, "I'm going to take my ball and go somewhere else."
Right.
Are you worried about that kind of split?
Well, yeah, I guess that I wouldn't like to see that, obviously. I personally don't think that will happen. Pat Buchanan's been very supportive of the party in the past. We certainly, as a party, cannot afford for some of our people to split off and go someplace else. There is room in our party for a lot of people. That was one of the things that I think we did very effectively in the last couple of elections here in North Dakota. And certainly it concerns me if that would happen, but I don't believe it will. From my perspective, here in North Dakota, I guess, I certainly hope that we don't have a candidate that runs that's a lot like me, but not, I'm not quite 100% and gets 4 or 5%, and then I lose 49 to 46 or something. So yeah, those things concern me a little bit, but we've got great leadership. Haley Barbour, and Haley Barbour has been a good friend of mine for a long, long time. I gave a seconding speech for him when he ran for RNC chairman. And one of the things I've always liked about Haley is he can bring us along. Right now we're in a heated campaign, but when it's all said and done and we get to the convention and it's all over, I'm confident that Pat Buchanan and everybody else will rally around the Republican nominee, who is going to be Bob Dole, and we'll get him elected to the White House.
More specifically, then, is there room in the Republican Party for those who are social moderates, social liberals versus social conservatives?
Oh, I certainly think there is. It wasn't that long ago. I still have a couple of bruises, but when I was chairman, you remember that I had a pro-choice and a pro-life co-chairman on the platform committee, and there was a painful couple of days there when we did that. But we showed that we all agree on so much that it's not appropriate that we would split over the few things that we don't agree on. And there's no question there's room. We have great leaders in our party who are more moderate than others. Some are more conservative than others. Christy Todd Whitman, the governor, is going to be speaking at our convention, and she's going to do a great job, and she represents a broad part of our party. Steve Largent, Congressman Steve Largent, is going to be there as my guest, and he's more conservative, and there's room for both of them on the same stage and the same day at the same party convention. And so we really are a big party. Frankly, it's the other party that's so extreme. They're so far to the left in their leadership right now, and trapped by that welfare industry that they're the ones that have the narrow party, and we're the ones that have the room for conservatives and moderates alike.
So, in your opinion, the Republican Party would be able to nominate behind a Bob Dole?
Oh, yes.
And that leads me to this thought.
Sure.
Are you a believer in coattails?
I am. Having grown up in politics and having been a professional at the state political level, I've seen the effects. I can tell you that North Dakota Republicans do very well in presidential years. We do better in presidential election years than non-presidential election years. Republican candidates do very well in North Dakota for president. In fact, only one Democrat has carried North Dakota since Roosevelt, and that was Johnson. Bill Clinton got 32% in North Dakota. All of those scientific trends play to our favor this time.
Then here's my unfair question for the day: whose coattails are stronger for you? Is it going to be Bob Dole, or is it going to be Ed Schaefer?
Well, it's kind of funny, on the ballot itself, I'm right between them. So I plan on grabbing one coattail with one hand and one with the other and riding them both to the top. I will say I'm very blessed to have somebody of the of the level and stature and credibility and class of Ed Schaefer as my governor and as my friend and as the titular head of our party, because he is just going to carry us, I think. In all honesty, Dave, I think that Ed Schaefer's popularity alone gives me several points.
Will you be asking Governor Schaefer, to campaign for you then?
Oh, absolutely, I will. I'll
do
be
a lot
with
of
him
joint appearances?
whenever I can, whenever it fits into his schedule, and it can only help me. There's no question. I only hope that that my presence with him is just a small portion is helpful.
Money being the mother's milk of politics, that I'm sure you probably thought about how much money you're going to have to spend to unseat Congressman Pomeroy. What's your thought about that? Can you give us at least a ballpark figure what you're looking at?
Yeah, we're going to need to have at least $500,000 and probably closer to $750,000 to unseat a sitting incumbent who is very good at going after PAC money and has been very successful in getting a lot of PAC money. So there's no question he will not be underfunded. He'll have all the money he needs to run. So we're just aggressively going after local money as much as we can. We are stating our positions clearly. I have a lot of help in Washington, D.C. with the majority leader helping me raise money out there. So we hope to be competitive. We certainly don't expect to be able to have as much money as he does. I think that's very realistic. It's not likely that we'll have that kind of cash. I don't have 2 United States senators raising money for me from my own state. He does, but nonetheless, we'll have enough.
There's going to be a lot of money spent in this race, and also in all races across the board. Yes. Just as a closing question, should there be some kind of campaign or finance reform or campaign reform so that we don't have to spend as much money? Or
yes, there should be.
I don't have any thoughts about what it should be.
The dollar amount doesn't bother me. I would hesitate to put caps on it because I think caps tend to favor then the incumbent who has all the other advantages of free mail. I say free mail, taxpayer-funded mail, press releases, franking privileges. Yeah, but so I hesitate to put caps on. But I do think that there should be a some type of reform that confines the members of Congress and the candidates for Congress to raise money, if not within their own district, at least within their own state, or at least within interests that have people that have interest in their state. I don't think, for example, that the Seafarers Union ought to be giving $10,000 to Earl Pomeroy. We're the most landlocked state in the country. What do we have in common with the Seafarers Union? So those
we do have a mythical navy.
Well, we do. And Devil's Lake's getting bigger every day. But I think that's stretching a bit. So I would like to see some reform so that members of Congress never feel beholden, or more importantly, that lobbying groups don't ever feel like members of Congress are beholden to them, but rather that they should feel beholden to the people who elected them.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time.
Dave, my pleasure as always.
And we will take you up in the debate if you're willing.
Anytime. I'd love to do it. I'd look forward to that.
Our guest on the Prairie Weekly today, Republican candidate for Congress, Kevin Cramer. If you have any comments or questions about this program or suggestions for future topics, please drop us a line. The address is Prairie Weekly, 1814 North 15th Street, Bismarck 58501. Or you can reach us by the internet. Our email address is ppr@pol.org. That's ppr@pol.org. And for the Prairie Weekly, I'm Dave Thompson.